The first punch dropped him before he saw it coming. Eli was 13. Homeless. Nobody's son, nobody's problem. But when three older boys cornered a little girl in that alley, laughing while she screamed, his body moved before his fear could stop it. He took every hit standing up. They beat him until his hands stopped working, until breathing felt like swallowing broken glass. He still didn't move. What nobody in that alley knew, what Eli didn't know, was whose daughter he was protecting. And when her father found out, 97 engines started at once. Before we continue, if you're the kind of person who believes one act of courage can shake an entire city, you're in the right place. Hit like, subscribe, and drop your location in the comments below. Where in the world are you watching this from? Let's see how far this story travels. Now let's continue with the story. The alley behind 5th Street smelled like burnt grease and standing water. Eli had learned to read alleys the way other kids read classrooms. The ones that were safe. The ones that weren't. The ones that looked empty but weren't quite. This one had a dumpster on the left side, a rusted fire escape overhead, and a dead end 30 feet back where the brick wall met a chain-link fence someone had stopped bothering to maintain years ago. He had cut through it 100 times without incident. Today was different. He felt it before he saw it. That particular stillness that settles over a space when something wrong is already happening inside it. Then he heard her. Not words, just a sound. The kind that lives below language, below thought, the raw, animal sound of someone small and terrified and out of options. It lasted less than 2 seconds before it was swallowed by laughter. That laughter was what moved him. Eli turned the corner and saw 3 of them. Older, bigger. The kind of boys who had learned early that size was a language and cruelty was vocabulary. The tallest one, broad across the shoulders, a scar splitting his left eyebrow, had his back to Eli. The other 2 flanked him, forming a loose wall between the dumpster and the dead end. And there, pressed against the brick, was a girl. 8 years old, maybe younger. Her yellow lunchbox lay crushed on the ground beside her. The latch broken open, its contents scattered. A juice box, a folded drawing, 3 strawberry candies rolling into a puddle. Her braids were pulled loose on one side. Her knees were scraped raw. She was trying not to cry and failing, her small chest heaving in fast, shallow bursts. She looked up. Her eyes found Eli across the length of that alley. He didn't think. He didn't calculate odds or consider consequences or remind himself that he was 13 years old, 49 pounds underweight, and had nobody in this city who would notice if he disappeared. He just walked forward. Hey! The word came out steadier than he felt. The tallest boy, Drez, the others would call him later, turned around slowly. He had the unhurried movements of someone who had never once been surprised by consequences. His eyes traveled from Eli's worn jacket to his mismatched shoes to his face, and what landed there wasn't anger. It was amusement. You lost, Drez said. The other 2 turned. One of them, Colt, shorter but meaner in the eyes, tilted his head like a dog that had spotted something it wanted to break. The third, Vane, was younger than the others, 15 at most. He didn't look entirely comfortable, but he didn't step back either. Eli kept walking until he was between them and the girl. He spread his arms. It was not a threatening gesture. He had nothing to threaten with. It was just a body in a doorway, a presence saying, "This is as far as you go." "Leave her alone," Eli said. Drez smiled. Not the kind that reached anything behind his eyes. "Street trash," he said softly, almost admiringly. "Wants to be a hero." The first punch came without further warning. Knuckles connected with Eli's jaw and his head snapped sideways, vision fracturing into white static. He hit the ground before he understood he was falling, palms scraping concrete, the taste of copper flooding his mouth instantly. For a single, stretched moment the world was just ringing and the smell of dirty asphalt pressed against his cheek. Then he heard her voice behind him. "Stop. Please stop." And he got up. Not fast. Not clean. He dragged himself back to his knees first, then planted one foot, then the other, swaying like something the wind had already broken once. His jaw throbbed in pulses that matched his heartbeat. But his feet found the same position they had been in before, between them and her. Arms out, Colt stepped in this time. A kick to the ribs that folded Eli sideways, a second that caught his shoulder and drove him into the chain-link fence. The metal bit into his back through his jacket. He used the fence to push himself off, stumbling forward, and ended up on his knees again directly in front of the girl. She grabbed the back of his jacket with both hands. "Don't," she whispered. "Please don't. You don't have to." He did not answer her. He was too busy breathing. There are moments in a person's life that arrive without announcement and ask everything. No preparation, no ceremony, just the moment and the choice, and whatever you are made of underneath everything life has stripped away. Eli had been stripped of a great deal. His mother's voice, first, then her presence. Then the apartment that smelled like her, lavender and burnt toast, when the landlord changed the locks 11 months ago. Then the shelter bed he'd lost to a man twice his age who decided seniority was decided by fists. Then the bag with his last clean shirt, dumped into a flooded gutter by 3 boys while a crowd of adults watched and looked away and kept walking. He had stood in that gutter, soaked to the bone, and made himself a promise. If I ever see it happening to someone else. I move. He moved. Drez grabbed him by the collar and lifted him, slamming his back against the brick wall hard enough to crack the air from his lungs. Up close he smelled like cigarettes and something synthetic and sweet. His eyes were flat, professional almost, like this was maintenance work. "You think this is going to end well for you?" Drez said quietly. Eli couldn't speak. He was still trying to locate his breath. It had gone somewhere outside his body and wasn't in a hurry to return. "He won't move," the girl said from behind them. Her voice had changed. The fear was still there. It would be there for a long time after this, but something else had crept in underneath it. Something fierce and bewildered and very young. "He keeps getting up. Why does he keep getting up?" Nobody answered her. Drez hit Eli twice more. Once in the ribs, once across the cheekbone. The second one turned the world sideways and Eli dropped, hands hitting concrete, broken fingers flaring with a pain so bright and specific it almost clarified everything. He pressed them flat against the ground and breathed. 1 breath, 2, pushed himself back up. Colt stared at him. "What is wrong with you?" Eli spit blood to the side. Looked up at them from the ground with one eye already swelling toward closed. "Nothing," he said. "Move around me." They didn't find that funny anymore. What followed was not a fight. Eli had no illusions about that. A fight requires 2 sides. What happened in the next 90 seconds was a punishment administered by people who had decided punishment was their right. Eli took it the way he had learned to take most things the world handed him, by reducing himself to the single most essential task. Stay between them and her. Everything else was noise. By the time it stopped, he was on his side on the concrete, knees drawn up, one arm covering his ribs. The alley tasted like rust and rain. Somewhere above him, pigeons moved on the fire escape, indifferent. Drez crouched down close to his ear. "Nobody's coming for you," he said, almost gently, like a fact about the weather. "You know that, right? Nobody cares about kids like you." He stood, straightened his jacket, looked at the girl one more time. A look that promised this conversation wasn't finished. And then the 3 of them walked away, unhurried, unconcerned. The sound of their footsteps faded around the corner and the alley went silent. The girl dropped to her knees beside Eli immediately. "Hey," she whispered, hands hovering over his face, afraid to touch anything that might make it worse. "Hey, stay awake. Please." He forced his eye open. She was blurry, freckled, terrified and trying not to show it. "I'm Eli," he managed. Her lip trembled, then steadied. "I'm Rose." she said. "My dad is going to come. I need you to stay awake until he comes." Eli almost said, "Nobody's dad comes for boys like me." But the ground beneath him had begun to vibrate. Faint at first, then less faint. A rhythm building from somewhere far across the city, rolling through concrete and asphalt and bone like the opening note of something enormous. Rose went completely still. Her eyes lifted from his face to the mouth of the alley. And in the dying afternoon light, the first shadow appeared on the wall. Long moving, followed by another, then so many that the shadows swallowed the light entirely and the sound became something that was no longer just sound. It was pressure, intention, the organized fury of people who had just seen something that could not be unseen. Rose's hand found his. She held it like she already knew what was coming. Eli didn't. Not yet. The vibration reached Eli's bones before it reached his ears. That was the thing about it. It didn't announce itself the way thunder did, with distance and warning and the courtesy of approach. It simply arrived inside him, low and constant, like the earth had developed a pulse it hadn't bothered to mention before now. He felt it through the concrete beneath his cheek, through his damaged ribs, through the palm Rose had pressed against the ground beside his own. He thought, for a moment, that it was his body finally giving out. Then Rose made a sound he hadn't heard from her yet. Not fear. Not relief. Something suspended between the two. A breath that couldn't decide what it wanted to be when it finished. She rose slowly from her knees, still holding his hand. Her eyes fixed on the mouth of the alley with an expression that belonged to someone much older than 8 years old. "They're coming," she said. Not hoped. Not wished. Stated. Eli tried to push himself upright. His left arm held. His right collapsed at the elbow, the broken fingers refusing the request entirely, and he ended up halfway between lying and sitting, propped against the chain-link fence with the metal pressing cold shapes into his back. Every breath arrived with a cost. He paid it anyway, watching the alley entrance the way Rose was watching it, though he had no idea what he was waiting for. The sound built the way pressure builds before something structural gives way. It wasn't one engine. That was the first thing he understood. One engine was a sound. This was a frequency. This was the accumulated mechanical voice of something organized and deliberate and very, very large, moving through the city streets with the unhurried certainty of things that don't need to hurry because everything else gets out of their way. 40 minutes earlier, in a warehouse on the eastern edge of the city, a phone had buzzed on a scarred wooden table. Then another. Then, in the space of 19 seconds, 95 more. The warehouse had once been a textile factory. The bones of that history remained in the high ceilings, the iron crossbeams, the wide concrete floor that had swallowed decades of sound without complaint. What occupied it now was different in every way that mattered. Motorcycles lined the far wall in a precision that suggested ritual rather than habit. Leather cuts hung from iron hooks. A long table dominated the center of the space, its surface mapped with rings from bottles and scored with the evidence of decisions made over years. Iron sat at the head of it. He was not a large man in the way that demanded immediate attention. He was large in the way that recalibrated a room once you understood what you were looking at. The kind of presence that didn't occupy space so much as redefine it. 44 years old. A face that had been through weather both literal and otherwise. Eyes the color of deep water on a cloudy day, not dark exactly, but the kind of color that didn't let light through easily. He was looking at his phone. The video had been posted 43 minutes ago by an account with 11 followers. It was already sitting at 60,000 views and climbing with the specific momentum of content that touches something true. Someone had added a caption. 3 words above the footage. Whose kid is this? Iron watched it once without expression. The alley. The girl pressed against the brick. His girl, his Rose, her yellow lunchbox crushed beside her like something the moment had stepped on casually. The 3 older boys. And then the thin figure walking into frame with the particular gait of someone who had already made a decision and was simply delivering it to the situation. He watched the first punch land. He watched the boy go down. He watched the boy get back up. He played it again from the beginning. Around the table, nobody spoke. 96 men had received the same video through the same channels at the same moment, and 96 men were experiencing variations of the same thing. A tightening across the chest, a heat behind the eyes, the specific internal whether that arrives when something involving a child goes wrong in your presence even secondhand. These were not soft men. They had between them witnessed and participated in chapters of human experience that would rearrange most people permanently. Softness was not the point, but there are things that reach past the armor every man constructs. Every single time, a child being hurt is one. A child being protected by someone with nothing to gain is another. Iron set the phone face down on the table. He stood. That was all. No speech. No raised voice. No declaration. He simply rose from his chair, and the room moved in response the way a field of grass responds to wind, immediate, total, and without requiring instruction. 96 men stood. Keys came off hooks. Cuts were pulled on with the practiced ease of men who had performed that particular motion 10,000 times. The warehouse, which had been holding a quiet conversation with itself when the phones buzzed, reorganized into something else entirely. Focused. Directional. A single organism that had just determined its heading. Iron paused at the door. "Find out which alley," he said to the man nearest him. Ren, gray-bearded, the chapter's longest-serving member, a man who had known Iron since before the name Iron existed. "Already done," Ren said. "Fifth and Callaway. Behind the laundromat." Iron nodded once. Outside, 97 motorcycles waited in the evening air. Back in the alley, Rose had begun to talk. Eli understood on some level that she was doing it deliberately, filling the silence between them with the sound of her voice to keep him tethered to consciousness. She told him about their dog, a three-legged shepherd named Beryl who had claimed the armchair in the clubhouse common room as sovereign territory and defended it with a seriousness that the men found both amusing and politically complicated. She told him that Ren made the best breakfast in the city but would deny it if you said so publicly because he had a reputation to maintain. She told him that the strawberry candies in her lunchbox had been a gift from the woman who ran the dry cleaning shop on 4th, who gave her 3 every Thursday without fail, and had been doing so since Rose was 5 years old. Small things. Living things. Eli listened because her voice was the rope and he was the thing at the end of it. And without the rope, the darkness that kept pressing at the edges of his vision would simply close. His fingers found the ground, pressed flat. The concrete was cold in the specific way that city concrete gets cold when the afternoon dies. Not the cold of nature, but the cold of stone that has absorbed a day's worth of human indifference and is returning it now that the foot traffic had thinned. "Are you still with me?" Rose asked. "Still here," he said. The words cost something. He paid it. She nodded, satisfied, and kept talking. She told him her name was Rose Callahan. She told him her dad's name was Iron, and that most people in the city knew that name even if they didn't know they knew it, the way most people know the name of the weather system before it reaches their town. She told him that her dad had a rule, one rule above all the others that governed his world, and that the rule was simple. "You do not touch what belongs to me." "He's going to come," she said. "Not for comfort. As information. When he sees the video he's going to come, and I need you to still be awake when he gets here because—" She stopped. The vibration had changed. It was no longer something felt through the ground. It was something felt through the air, through the chest cavity, through the specific frequency that the human body reserves for recognizing things that are larger than itself. The sound had arrived. It filled the alley from end to end and pressed against the brick walls with the confidence of something that had never once been asked to make itself smaller. Headlights swept across the alley wall. 1 pair, then 4, then too many to separate. Rose stood up slowly, her hand still loosely holding Eli's. She turned toward the mouth of the alley, and in the wash of light that now flooded the space, Eli could see her profile clearly. The torn braid, the scraped chin, the expression that had settled over her small face like weather that had finally decided what it was going to do. She wasn't afraid. She was waiting. The engines dropped to idle one by one, until the roar became a growl and the growl became a presence. Shadows moved in the headlights, large ones, many of them, then one separated from the rest, unhurried, heavy, deliberate. It walked toward them with the particular authority of a man who had not asked permission for anything in a very long time and had no intention of starting now. Rose exhaled. "Dad," she whispered. The figure stopped at the edge of the light, features still held in shadow. A long moment passed, the kind that compresses time, that makes 3 seconds feel like the space between one version of the world and the next. Then he stepped forward into the light, and the first thing Iron did, before he spoke, before he looked at his daughter, before he did anything at all, was look directly at Eli. Not with the expression Eli expected. Not anger. Not the cold assessment of a man calculating a threat. Something else entirely. Something that Eli, in 13 years of reading the faces of people who held power over his circumstances, had never once seen directed at him. What it was exactly, what it meant, what it was about to cost both of them. Eli would not understand for several hours yet, but Rose understood it immediately, and she tightened her grip on his hand like she was the one holding him to the earth now, not the other way around. "Don't look away," she murmured, so quietly it barely cleared her lips. "Whatever you do, don't look away from him." Eli didn't, and Iron kept walking. Iron did not rush. That was the thing Eli noticed first. The absence of urgency in a man who had just arrived with 96 others at the site where his daughter had been cornered and beaten. Most people, when they reached the end of a fear, collapsed into it. Released everything they had been holding during the approach. Iron did the opposite. He arrived and became more still, more concentrated, like a storm that had traveled a great distance and was now deciding, with complete deliberation, exactly where to put everything it had carried. He crouched in front of Eli, not beside him, not above him, in front, level, direct, close enough that Eli could see the specific geography of his face without the mercy of distance to soften it. The scar that ran from his left temple to the edge of his jaw. The way the skin around his eyes had been weathered into permanent focus. The hands, resting loosely on his knees, ink from wrist to knuckle, that looked like they had built things and broken things in roughly equal measure and had made a certain peace with both. He looked at Eli the way a man looks at something he is trying to understand before he decides what it means. Eli looked back. He had nothing else to offer. His body was an inventory of damage. One eye nearly sealed, 2 fingers splinted against each other by Rose using a pen and a strip torn from the lining of her jacket during the weight, ribs that sent a bright specific complaint through his torso with every inhale. He was sitting upright against the chain-link fence through a combination of stubbornness and the fence's cooperation, and he was aware, with the particular clarity that extreme pain sometimes delivers, that he was not going to be able to sustain this position much longer. But he did not look away. Behind Iron, the 96 arranged themselves with a naturalness that suggested long practice. Not a crowd, a formation. The alley, which had felt like a dead end an hour ago, now felt like the center of something. A point around which a great deal of weight had quietly organized itself. "You're Eli," Iron said. It was not a question. "Yes. She told you her name." "Rose," Eli said. "She told me about the dog too." "Beryl." Something moved across Iron's face, gone before it fully arrived. "She talks when she's scared," he said. "Always has." "It helped," Eli said. "Kept me from going under." A pause. Iron studied him through it. "How old are you?" 13. The man behind Iron, Ren, gray-bearded, who had ridden directly behind Iron the entire distance and positioned himself now at Iron's left shoulder like punctuation, exhaled quietly through his nose. Not a reaction to information, a reaction to confirmation of something he had suspected from the footage and hoped was wrong. Iron did not look away from Eli. Where do you live? The question landed with the particular weight of questions that already contain their own answer. Eli considered lying, briefly, then dismissed it. Lying to this man felt less like self-protection and more like a structural error, the kind that wouldn't be discovered immediately but would compromise everything built on top of it. Wherever the rain isn't, Eli said. The alley held that sentence for a moment. How long? Iron asked. 11 months. Since? Eli's jaw tightened. The movement sent pain radiating up toward his swollen eye. Since my mother, he said. He did not finish the sentence. Iron did not require him to. Rose, standing 3 feet to Eli's right, had gone very still. She was watching her father with the careful attention of a child who had learned to read adult silences the way other children learn to read clocks. As information, as navigation, as the difference between one kind of moment and another. Iron stood, slowly. The full height of him returned to the alley like a tide coming in. He turned to Wren. Get Doc, he said. And get the van. He doesn't ride like this. Already called, Wren said. 8 minutes out. Iron nodded. Then he did something Eli did not expect. He turned back, removed his leather cut. The one with the president's patch. The one that in this world carried more institutional weight than most official titles. And draped it across Eli's shoulders. Not ceremonially, practically. The evening had turned cold and Eli's jacket was torn through in 2 places, and the cut was warm and substantial and present in the way that objects become present when someone has decided they matter. Eli stared at the ground. He did not trust what his face was doing. The clubhouse appeared to him in fragments. The van's interior first. The smell of oil and old upholstery. Rose sitting beside him with her shoulder pressed against his. Wren in the front passenger seat making calls in a low voice that contained more information per sentence than most people managed in paragraphs. Then the exterior of the building itself, glimpsed through the van's small rear window. Brick, iron-barred, deliberately unremarkable in the way that things are unremarkable when their security depends on not attracting attention. Then the interior, which was everything the exterior was not. The space had been lived in. Genuinely, fully, over a long period of time. The walls held photographs, not decorative ones but documentary ones, the kind that accumulate in a place because people keep returning to it and someone keeps pointing a camera at the evidence of that return. Long tables. A bar along one wall attended by a man with a prosthetic left hand, who nodded at Iron without interrupting whatever internal calculation he was engaged in. The smell of coffee and something cooking and the specific atmospheric residue of a place where a great number of people had spent a great number of hours making decisions. They put Eli on a leather couch near the back wall. Doc, who was introduced by title only, a compact man in his 50s with reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead and hands that moved with the brisk economy of someone who had been making do with available resources for a very long time, worked on him without ceremony and without excessive gentleness. The 2 qualities existing in balance the way skilled practitioners achieve without discussion. Ribs aren't broken, Doc said, pressing carefully along Eli's side. Bruised. Significantly. He moved to the hand. 2 fingers. Fractures, not breaks. Rose did a decent job with the pen. He glanced at her. You've been paying attention. I always pay attention, Rose said from the chair she had pulled directly beside the couch. I know, Doc said. That's what I said. Iron stood at the edge of the room, arms crossed, watching. Around him, men moved with the purposeful quiet of a place that had shifted from one operational mode to another. Conversations in corners, phones consulted, the occasional low exchange that stopped when it reached its conclusion and didn't continue past necessity. When Doc finished and stepped back, Iron moved forward. He sat in the chair Rose vacated without being asked, which Rose took as instruction and relocated to the couch arm beside Eli's feet. Iron leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at Eli with the same concentrated attention he had given him in the alley. The difference was the setting. Here, without the headlights and the formation and the pressure of the arrival, it felt less like assessment and more like something that required a different word. something that hadn't been fully named yet. The video, Iron said, has been seen by 400,000 people. Eli blinked. What video? Someone across the street, Iron said. They recorded it. Posted it before the boys even left the alley. He paused. You're recognizable. So is Rose. So is the alley. Another pause. So are the 3 boys. The room felt different after that sentence. They've been identified, Iron continued. All 3. Drez Calder, 17. Colt Marin, 16. Vane Purcell, 15. He said the names the way you say coordinates, not with emotion, but with the specific flatness of someone who has converted feeling into information because information is actionable and feeling, in this moment, is a complication. Where are they? Ren asked from across the room. That, Iron said, is being handled. The silence that followed had texture. Wait, the kind of silence that exists in the space between a decision being made and the world being informed of it. Eli looked at the cut still draped across his shoulders. He had forgotten it was there. The weight of it had become familiar in the way that unfamiliar comforts sometimes do, quickly, and with a thoroughness that is later difficult to explain. What happens? Eli said carefully. When you find them? Iron looked at him for a long moment. That depends, Iron said. On what? Iron's eyes didn't move, didn't shift or soften or offer the question back as reassurance. On you, he said. The words arrived without drama. Simply, the way the most consequential things often do, without the announcement their weight deserves, landing in the ordinary air of an ordinary room and changing the temperature of everything. Eli stared at him. I'm 13, Eli said. I'm nobody. Iron did not correct him immediately. He let the sentence exist for a moment, as if examining it from multiple angles, before he responded. You were nobody, Iron said quietly. This morning, before Eli could process what that meant, before the shape of it could fully form in the part of his mind that translated language into implication. Ren appeared in the doorway across the room. His expression had changed. The operational calm had been replaced by something compressed and alert. Boss, Ren said. Iron turned. We found them, Ren said. All 3. A beat. They're not alone. Iron stood slowly. What do you mean? Ren's eyes moved briefly to Eli, then back to Iron with the specific weight of information being filtered for present company. Drez Calder, Ren said. His father is Terrence Calder. The name landed in the room and did something to it. Men who had been in conversation stopped. The man behind the bar set down what he was holding. Rose, on the couch arm beside Eli's feet, went perfectly still in the way children go still when they understand that the adults around them have just received news that is going to change the shape of things. Iron's jaw tightened by a fraction. Say that again, he said. Terrence Calder, Ren repeated. Tri-City Syndicate, Eastern Operations. The silence that followed was of a completely different character than any silence that had preceded it. Eli looked from face to face around the room, reading what he could from expressions that had been trained over years to reveal as little as possible. What he found in the gaps between the discipline was enough. This was no longer about 3 boys in an alley. This had just become something else entirely. Something larger. Something with sides and history and the kind of weight that didn't distribute itself evenly, that found the smallest, least protected point in any structure and pressed there first. Rose's hand found his arm in the dark. Her grip was different this time. Not the grip of a child holding someone to consciousness. The grip of someone holding on because the ground had just shifted beneath both of them, and she was not entirely certain it was finished moving. Terrence Calder. Eli didn't know the name, but he knew the room's reaction to it, and that was enough. There was a specific quality to the silence that followed Ren's announcement. Not the silence of men who were afraid, but the silence of men who were recalibrating. Adjusting the architecture of what they had believed this situation to be against the architecture of what it had just revealed itself to actually be. These were not the same building. Iron stood at the center of the room with his back to Eli, and Eli watched the small movements that traveled through his frame, the almost imperceptible shift of weight, the slow expansion of his shoulders as he drew a breath and held it, the way his hands, hanging at his sides, closed into loose fists and then, deliberately opened again. Control. Not the absence of feeling. The management of it. How connected? Iron asked. Deep, Ren said. Tri-City moves product through the Eastern Corridor. Calder runs the logistics. Has done for 11 years. Ren paused. He's been looking for a reason to test your boundary on the Callaway district for 8 months. We've known that. And now his son gives him one, Iron said. Not a question. A conclusion arriving at its own destination. He'll frame it that way, Ren said. Whatever we do to the boy, Terrence reframes as aggression, provocation. An excuse for what he's been planning anyway. The fire behind the bar. A low thing in an iron grate, more presence than heat, shifted and sent a brief pulse of orange light across the room. In it, Eli could see the faces of the men arranged around Iron. He had spent his entire conscious life reading rooms, reading the faces of adults who held power over his circumstances. Shelter intake workers, police officers, the men who controlled which doorways were safe to sleep in and which were not. He had developed, through necessity, a particular sensitivity to the emotional weather inside a space. What he read now was complicated. These men were angry. That was the surface layer, accessible, obvious, requiring no skill to identify. Beneath it was something more textured, a strategic frustration. The particular fury of people who have a clear moral imperative and a complicated political obstacle between them and acting on it. Rose had not moved from the couch arm. She was looking at her father's back with an expression Eli recognized from his own reflection in shop windows on mornings when the night had been particularly difficult. The expression of someone absorbing information that is reorganizing their understanding of how much danger they are actually in. Where is Terrence now? Iron asked. Made 3 calls in the last hour, Ren said. To his lawyer, to his logistics coordinator, and to a number we've been tracking for 6 months that belongs to a city council member we'd rather not name in present company. A beat. He knows we have the boys, Ren finished. Iron turned around. His eyes went to Rose first. A long look, the kind that travels the full length of a parent's love and fear in the space of 2 seconds and returns with everything it found. Then his eyes moved to Eli. I need the room, Iron said. Except those 2. The men filed out with the same wordless efficiency that characterized everything they did. Ren was last. He pulled the heavy door behind him and the latch engaged with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. The 3 of them existed in the quiet. Iron pulled a chair from the table. Not his usual one at the head, but a middle chair, the kind that implied conversation rather than authority, and sat. He leaned forward in the way he had in the alley, elbows on knees, the physical posture of a man who was choosing presence over position. I need to ask you something, he said to Eli, and I need the real answer, not the answer you think I want. Eli waited. When Drez said nobody was coming for you, Iron said, what did you feel? The question arrived without warning in a place Eli kept defended. He felt the automatic response rising. The deflection, the shrug, the performance of indifference that had become so practiced it sometimes fooled even him. He looked at Iron's face. The quality of attention there made the deflection feel structurally dishonest in a way he couldn't justify. I felt like he was right, Eli said. But you stayed anyway. Yes. Why? Eli looked at his splinted fingers resting on his knee. Because being right about me didn't make him right about her, he said. She deserved someone. Whether I did or not didn't change what she needed. The fire shifted again. Rose was watching Eli with an expression he couldn't fully read. Something compressed and certain, the way people look when they hear a thing said aloud that they have known quietly for some time. Iron sat back slowly. Terrence Calder is going to use his son as a political instrument, Iron said. Whatever I do in that room when those 3 boys arrive here, however I handle it, he's watching. He has people watching, and he will use it. So what do you do? Eli asked. That, Iron said, is what I'm sitting here trying to decide. A long silence. He's counting on me to be what people think I am, Iron said quietly, almost to himself. He's counting on me to walk into that room and confirm every assumption. Give him his incident. Give him his story. His jaw worked. Terence Calder has been waiting 8 months for me to hand him a weapon. And tonight, his son walked into an alley and tried to build one for him. Eli understood something then. Not the full architecture of it, the history, the territory, the specific political weight of names he didn't know, but the essential shape. This had never been only about 3 boys and an alley. This was a test with consequences attached. And the consequences did not belong only to the people who had been in that alley. They belonged to everyone under this roof. To Rose. To the district Iron's name had protected for years. To the quiet arrangements that kept certain kinds of violence from arriving at certain kinds of doors. What would happen, Eli said slowly, if you didn't do what he expects? Iron looked at him. What do you mean? He's expecting a reaction, Eli said. He's built a plan around your reaction. What if the reaction he gets isn't the one his plan requires? The room was very quiet. You're 13 years old, Iron said. Not dismissively. With a specific quality, the tone of a statement that is also a question about how a statement like that is possible. I've had to think about situations like this my whole life, Eli said, just with smaller stakes. Iron studied him for a moment that stretched past comfort into something else. Then something shifted in his expression, not warmth exactly, but the specific opening that occurs when a person encounters something they did not budget for and are deciding how to accommodate it. Ren, Iron called. The door opened immediately. Ren had not gone far. Bring them in, Iron said. All 3. Together. Ren's eyebrow moved a fraction. Together. Together, Iron confirmed. And call Terence. Now both of Ren's eyebrows moved. You want to call Terence Calder, Ren said carefully. While his son is in this building. I want him on the phone before anything happens in that room, Iron said. I want him listening. Ren absorbed this. Then nodded once and withdrew. Rose slid off the couch arm and came to stand beside Eli. She didn't speak. She simply positioned herself there with the quiet deliberateness of someone who had decided where they belonged in a particular moment and was not interested in negotiating it. The door at the far end of the room opened. Drez came in first. He was different here. The alley had given him architecture, the walls, the shadows, the physical advantage of numbers and size. Stripped of that context, brought into a lit room occupied by men whose collective biography was written in scar tissue and hard consequence, he looked younger. Not young enough to be innocent, but young enough to be recognizable as someone who had learned cruelty before he had learned much else, which was its own kind of damage, even if it did not excuse the damage he had dealt. Colt came in behind him, eyes moving, calculating exits. Vane came in last. He saw Eli immediately. Something crossed his face. A flinch, involuntary and honest, the kind the body produces before the mind can manage the presentation. He looked at the splinted fingers, the swollen eye, the leather cut still draped across Eli's shoulders. And the expression that settled over Vane's face after the flinch was not what Eli expected from someone who had participated in what had happened in that alley. It looked, with uncomfortable precision, like shame. Iron let them stand for a long moment without speaking. The silence was architectural, a structure he was building around them, letting them feel the dimensions of it. Then his phone buzzed on the table. He looked at the screen. "Terence," he said quietly. He answered it. Put it on speaker. Set it on the table between himself and the 3 boys without explanation. A voice came through the phone. Measured. Urbane. The voice of a man who had learned to weaponize reasonableness. "Iron," the voice said. I understand you have my son. I have 3 boys, Iron said. One of them is yours. I think we should discuss the appropriate way to handle a situation between. I'm going to stop you, Iron said. Because the person who decides what happens in this room tonight isn't me. Pause on the line. I'm sorry, Terrence said. Iron's eyes moved to Eli. The 3 boys followed his gaze. Drez stared at Eli with an expression that moved through several territories in rapid succession before landing on something that looked dangerously like the beginning of understanding. The boy your son put on the ground, Iron said into the phone, his eyes still on Eli, his voice carrying the specific weight of a man who has made a decision and is now simply delivering it to the world. He decides. The silence on the phone was total. And in that silence Terrence Calder's entire plan. 8 months of positioning, of patience, of waiting for Iron to hand him exactly the incident he needed, began very quietly to come apart. But Eli wasn't thinking about Terrence Calder. He was looking at Vane, at the shame on that 15-year-old face that nobody else in the room seemed to have noticed yet. And he was thinking about something Iron had said earlier, in the quieter version of this room, before the walls had filled back up with consequence and history and the political weight of names. You were nobody this morning. He turned the sentence over, examined what was underneath it. Then he looked at Drez, Colt, Vane. And he understood, with a clarity that arrived without warning and settled without permission, exactly what he was going to say. What he could not know, what none of them could know, was that the words he was about to speak would not only determine the fate of 3 boys in a lit room. They would determine something about Terrence Calder's operation that Iron had been trying to achieve for 8 months through every other available means. Eli opened his mouth, and the phone on the table. Terrence Calder, still listening, still waiting, his entire strategy suspended on whatever came next, went completely silent. The room waited, not with the restless, shifting energy of people who were uncomfortable with silence, with the particular stillness of people who understood that what was about to be spoken carried weight that the air itself needed to prepare for. 96 men had filtered back in without being summoned. Word traveling through the clubhouse the way significant things always travel in close communities. Faster than announcement, slower than rumor, arriving at the precise speed of truth. They lined the walls, arms crossed, faces unreadable in the practiced way. But their eyes were on Eli. Every single one of them. Drez stood in the center of the room. Colt slightly behind him, one shoulder angled toward the door in the posture of someone who had not yet abandoned the idea of distance as a solution. Vane had not moved since he entered. He stood with his hands at his sides and his eyes on the floor, and the shame that had arrived on his face when he first saw Eli had not left. It had deepened, the way color deepens when it is genuine rather than performed. Terrence Calder's voice was still open on the phone, still listening, still present in the room as a breath held by a man 100 miles away who had spent 8 months building toward a moment that was currently being disassembled by a 13-year-old boy in a borrowed leather cut. Eli looked at Drez first, not because Drez was the most important person in the room, because Drez was the one who needed to be looked at directly, the one whose eyes had the most ground to cover between where they were and where this conversation required them to go. Drez met his gaze, held it. The defiance was still there, architectural, load-bearing. But underneath it, visible now in the way foundations become visible when the structure above them is under stress, was something younger and less certain. "I'm not going to ask you why," Eli said. His voice was steady. It cost him something to make it that way. His ribs still registered every breath as a complaint, and speaking at volume required a depth of inhale that the bruising made expensive. But the steadiness was real, not performed. It came from the same place the stubbornness in the alley had come from. The place that remained after everything else had been taken. "I already know why," he continued. "You found someone smaller, someone you decided didn't count. And you used that, because somewhere along the way, someone taught you that's what power looks like." Drez's jaw tightened. He said nothing. The problem, Eli said, is that it isn't. If the story is reaching something real in you, if you've ever been the person on the ground, or the person who walked past, stay with us. Like this video, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. This community is built for people who believe one person standing up actually matters. We'll see you in the next one. He turned to Vane. The 15-year-old finally looked up, as if he had sensed the shift in direction before it arrived. His eyes were red at the edges, not from crying, but from the sustained effort of not doing so in a room full of men who wore their endurance like a second skin. You didn't want to be there, Eli said. I could see it. You didn't throw a punch until Drez looked at you. Vane's throat moved. That doesn't make you innocent, Eli said. But it makes you something different. He looked at all three of them then, and what he said next was the thing that had formed in the quiet of his own chest while the room filled and the phone connected and Iron's eyes settled on him with the weight of a transferred decision. I don't want them hurt, Eli said. The room moved. Not physically. The way a room moves when its collective intake of breath happens simultaneously and nobody acknowledges it. Iron, standing to Eli's left, did not react. He waited with the patience of a man who had learned that the most important thing a person in authority can do in certain moments is remain absolutely still and let the truth find its own level. I don't want them hurt, Eli repeated, because hurting them doesn't fix anything I care about fixing. It gives Terrence Calder what he needs. It confirms what he's been telling people about this room and everyone in it. He paused. And it doesn't change what happened in that alley. It just adds to it. He looked at the phone on the table. Mr. Calder, he said. A beat. Then, I'm listening. The voice was careful now. The urbanity still present but reorganized. The tone of a man who had arrived at a negotiation expecting a particular counterparty and found someone else entirely seated across the table. Your son is going to walk out of this building, Eli said. All three of them are. Unhurt. He let that land. In exchange, you're going to leave the Callaway district alone. Not because Iron made you. Because a 13-year-old boy with nothing asked you to. And you're going to have to live with what that means about you if you don't. The silence on the phone was of a different character than any that had preceded it. It was the silence of a calculated man encountering a variable his calculation had not included and being required, in real time with witnesses to revise. That's not how these conversations usually go, Terrence said finally. No, Eli agreed. It isn't. Another silence. Longer. I'll need something in return, Terrence said. A gesture. Something I can. You'll need to decide, Iron said, speaking for the first time since he had handed the room to Eli. Whether the story of tonight is the one where Terrence Calder backed down when a homeless kid asked him to, or the one where he didn't. A pause. Both stories get told. You choose which one. The phone was quiet for 11 seconds. Eli counted them. Callaway stays yours, Terrence said. The urbanity had flattened out. What remained was simpler. A man making a calculation and arriving, with visible reluctance, at the only answer the math supported. We'll consider this closed. Iron reached over and ended the call. The room exhaled. It was not a dramatic sound. It was the sound of collective tension finding a release valve. Quiet, distributed, the kind of release that comes not from triumph but from resolution. The difference between those two things was significant, and every person in that room was experienced enough to know it. Ren stepped forward and opened the door. Drez moved first. He walked toward the exit with the particular gait of someone who had arrived expecting one kind of consequence and was leaving with another and had not yet determined what to do with the difference. At the threshold he stopped. Turned. Looked at Eli across the length of the room. He did not apologize. Eli had not asked him to. What passed across Drez's face in that moment was more complicated than apology. Something that would take him considerably longer to process and considerably more life experience to fully understand. But the beginning of it was there. He left. Colt followed without looking back. Vane stopped in the doorway. He turned, and what he did was unexpected enough that it silenced the residual murmur of the room completely. He looked at Eli, and he nodded. Small, deliberate. The nod of someone who has understood something they would have preferred not to understand because understanding it required them to know something uncomfortable about themselves. Eli nodded back. Then Vane was gone, and the door swung shut, and the room reconfigured itself around the people who remained. Iron crossed to Eli. He reached into his cut, the one he had draped across Eli's shoulders in the alley, that Eli was still wearing, that had become in the intervening hours something more complex than borrowed warmth, and he removed something from the interior pocket. He held it for a moment without showing it. Then he set it on the table between them. It was a prospect patch. Small, worn at the edges in the way of things that have been kept carefully rather than used. The kind of object that has been waiting rather than aging. This was mine, Iron said, before I was Iron, before any of this. He looked at the patch. I've been carrying it for 6 years, waiting to understand why. Eli stared at it. I'm 13, he said, for the third time that night. But the sentence meant something different each time he said it, and this time what it meant was not I am too young or I am nobody. This time it was something closer to I need to understand what you are offering before I reach for it. You're 13, Iron agreed, and you are the only person who has ever walked into a room full of men who've spent their lives making people afraid, and made them quiet instead. Rose appeared at Eli's side. She had been there in the periphery through all of it. Present witness, the reason the alley had happened, and therefore the reason this room had happened, and therefore the reason this moment was possible. She looked at the patch on the table, then up at her father, then at Eli. It doesn't mean you belong to this, Iron said, gesturing at the room, the walls, the accumulated weight of what the place represented. It means this belongs to you. Protection. A name that carries something behind it. People who know your face when you walk through the door. He paused. It means you're not alone anymore. If you want that. Eli looked at the patch for a long time. He thought about the flooded gutter and the bag with his last clean shirt. He thought about his mother's voice, which he could still hear on certain mornings if he remained very still before full consciousness arrived and carried it away. He thought about the alley, the cold concrete, the specific quality of Dres' laughter, the way Rose's hands had felt on his face when she said stay awake, please stay awake. He thought about what it had felt like to matter, not to be thanked, not to be praised, to matter in the fundamental, structural sense of the word, to be the thing that made a difference to whether another person was safe or not. He had felt it before. Briefly, in isolated moments that the world had never seen fit to string together into something continuous. Tonight, for the first time, someone was offering to string them together. He picked up the patch. It was lighter than he expected. The weight of it was not in the object. The weight of it was in what the object represented, and that weight distributed itself differently once you were holding it. Not heavier, more evenly carried. Rose put her hand over his. Welcome home, she said. Quietly, the way you say something that has been true for a while and is only now being named. Eli closed his fingers around the patch. Outside, the city continued its business. Indifferent, vast, full of alleys and corners and moments that would never be witnessed and names that would never be spoken aloud in rooms that mattered. That was the city's nature. It forgot most of what happened inside it. But 96 men would remember this night. And somewhere in the Eastern District, Terrence Calder sat with a dead phone in his hand and 8 months of planning that had just been quietly, completely, and irrevocably dismantled by a boy who had arrived at the conversation with nothing except the particular authority that belongs exclusively to people who have already survived the worst the world had for them and chosen, on the other side of it, to remain decent. Iron rested a hand on Eli's shoulder. The weight of it was steady. Present. The hand of a man who had decided something and was communicating it the way men like him communicated the things that mattered most, not with words, but with the simple, unambiguous language of showing up and staying there. "You hungry?" Iron asked. Eli almost laughed. The sound that came out was rough and real and belonged to someone younger than the night had required him to be. Younger than the alley, younger than the clubhouse, younger than the phone call and the patch and the weight of a decision that had reorganized the district's political landscape before midnight. It was the laugh of a 13-year-old boy who had not had anywhere to be for 11 months. "Yeah," Eli said. "I'm hungry." Ren, who had appeared in the kitchen doorway at some point during the last exchange, turned back toward the stove without comment. The smell of something real and warm began to move through the clubhouse. Rose pulled Eli off the couch by his good hand, carefully, leading him toward the table where men were already pulling out chairs and making room in the unceremonious, practical way of people who have decided someone belongs among them and see no reason to make a ceremony of logistics. Eli sat down at the table. For the first time in 11 months, he did not calculate how long he was allowed to stay.